So the next panel, I'd like to invite up Matt Hatton from Transforma, where we'll have a session and a panel where we'll discuss how to make the transition from mobile IoT to massive IoT.
Hello, am I on? Is this thing on? Hello, I'm Matt Hatton. This is my 17th Mobile World Congress. There's probably a load of you in the audience who have been to more than that. And I've been an industry analyst for 25 years. And during that 25 years, I've had the opportunity to be cynical about things. And I've also had the opportunity to be a bit of a flag waver for things, to be very positive about areas. Now, people tell me at the moment to be a little cynical about IoT, and maybe to be a little bit cynical about 5G, but in this instance, I'm going to wave the flag for it. There's some tremendous use cases, some tremendous adoption happening in the space. There's billions of devices using the 5G IoT, the MMTC technologies going in China. There are smart meter deployments happening in countries around Europe and all around the world. There are some operators that we've spoken to recently during a lot of our research who are connecting. 40% of their new connections are using LTE-M. There's certainly reason to be positive. But there's some work to be done. And these gentlemen have been doing some of that work. So basis of this panel is to talk about the 5G IoT Strategy Group. We have some representative members of that. If I can ask you to introduce yourself, starting with Ronan, and going along the panel. If you can introduce yourself, talk about who you are and where you come from.
Yeah, I'm Ronan Le Bras from Orange, and I was, until yesterday, the chair of that 5G IoT Strategy Group.
Good afternoon. My name is Igor Tovberg. I'm responsible for the product marketing at Sony Semiconductor Israel. We develop chipsets for cellular IoT, shipping tens of millions of chipsets for multiple verticals. And I guess with high probability we have several people here in this audience, guys that are either wearing devices with our chipset inside, or having the smart meters at your homes with our chipsets, or either your pets, dogs, might be using our chipsets. As my second role, outside of Sony, I've been serving during the last 2 years as a vice chair at the 5G IoT Strategy Group. And later on today, we'll discuss about some good activities we are delivering to the industry.
Thanks, Igor. So my name is Luca Ibbetson. I run the Research and Development Department at Vodafone Group Worldwide. I've been a proud member of this community looking at LPWA, low power wide area, within the GSMA context for at least the last, 5, 6, 7 years. Part of a group of people that helped pioneer some of the technologies that we take for granted today, such as narrowband IoT. And I also am very pleased to be part of the GSMA IoT Strategy Group, and pleased for joining my colleagues today.
Excellent. And Sam?
My name's Sam Colley. I'm CEO of Pubg Group, part of the G&D organization. Been in IoT since, 11 years, 12 years now, since it was M2M, and obviously we've seen everything evolve from connectivity to applications, and it's been a great journey. So it's a real pleasure to be up here with these leading brains around the strategy group, which I'm not part of, but it's great to see the work that they've been doing. So.
Excellent. Thank you. As mentioned, the background to this session is to talk about the GSMA 5G IoT Strategy Group. Ronan, come to you first. Can you talk us a little bit about what was involved in that working group?
Yes. So this group was formed a few years ago as the Mobile IoT Group, and then it was moved to 5G IoT Strategy Group 2 years ago. In fact, it's a collaborative work done with a group of operators, so MNOs, network infrastructure vendors, chipset and module maker that are all interested in ensuring that the mobile IoT technology and now the 5G IoT technology are developed to answer the needs of the enterprise market, and especially of some key verticals in that enterprise market. And so we've been working and focusing on in different direction. We will see a bit later some of the work that's been done on energy efficiency, for example. So it's been a key aspect of that work. So through some technical exchange, discussion, confrontation sometimes, we try to produce some recommendations. Some of them are published on the GSMA website, and you can see a bit later the work that's been produced. And you can download. They are available for download on the website. And other topics that we've been dealing, apart from the energy, has been the improving the deployment of these functionalities, because 3GPP is defining the standards, but between the time the standardization is done and the time the implementation is done in networks, there's been sometimes some development, and so there are some priorities. Some features are prioritized and others are not prioritized. So this group has worked on a deployment guide, which is now available and include both NB-IoT and LTE-M evolution. And in this, and I think Luc will talk about it a little bit later, you can find what is widely available on networks and what will be available in the next future. So it's really a collective work in that group to ensure that there is a common implementation, and so it's making the life easier for developers when they develop a product, whether it's a hardware service based on that hardware. They can be sure that everywhere in the world, when the networks are deployed, their service will work. So that's been really the emphasis, and the objective of this group is to make sure that the mobile IoT and now the 5G IoT technology are implemented in a coherent manner all around the globe, basically.
Okay. Can I ask you a terminology question as well? So we're talking about 5G IoT. We're including in that NB-IoT and LTE-M, although obviously LTE-M, the clue is maybe in the name that it didn't necessarily originate as part of 5G, right? So this is all under that umbrella of 5G IoT now for people in the audience who aren't familiar.
Correct. So NB-IoT and LTE-M were launched in the 4G era, and they were what we called at that time the mobile IoT. I think a few years ago we had a summit called Mobile IoT Summit. But with the evolution in release 15 and release 16, they become part of the 5G family, and they will be part of the massive MTC element of 5G. They will answer the needs of the use case that are what sometimes is called LP1 use case, meaning long battery life, low cost, and wide area coverage. But 5G IoT is bigger than this. It will encompass more higher speed type use case, where the use of NR, like RedCap, will come into the family. But in fact, yeah, the NB-IoT and LTE-M are inherent part of the 5G IoT MMTC story.
Yeah. And just to be sure, yeah, Igor, yeah, jump in, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to complete maybe a few words about the 5G IoT. We still see some networks are using 2G, and the transition is happening these days. The 2G networks are sunsetting, and we probably won't see them soon. And actually, for the IoT, we have two technologies that has been defined initially under the LTE definition. These are the LTE-M and NB-IoT. And we are absolutely confident to say that these two technologies are the truly 5G technologies. These LTE-M and NB-IoT technologies will stay with us throughout the entire 5G era. And this is the expectation from the MNOs that these two networks will be maintained for at least coming 2 decades.
So anybody who's concerned about future-proofing, don't be, is the conclusion on that. Okay, good. So Igor, I want to come to you. We had a great introduction from G&D just a moment ago about sustainability. There's a big topic within this working group about energy, end-to-end energy efficiency associated with these, with NB-IoT, LTE-M, the 5G IoT as a whole. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so one of the works we conducted last year, and actually I did have a pleasure standing at this stage at the MWC last year, to share with you the document which is talking about the energy efficiency. The energy efficiency white paper, this is a guideline document to any customer who is developing a cellular IoT product. The device that's supposed to be energy efficient, this is not just about the hardware, so we should look at the device also from the network perspective. What are the features are being supported by the network? What are the features that are being supported by the new releases? For example, there has been some features introduced in release 13, release 14, release 15, and for those device developers that wish to optimize their products to be efficiently, again, I'm talking about the power efficiency, operating at the MNOs networks, they have to take into account multiple factors. So we discussed about the release, 3GPP release features. We discussed about the 2G that, as I said, still exists, but this is not the most optimized in terms of the power efficiency technology. LTE-M and NB-IoT are much more efficient, and if you have a rough comparison in terms of the power figures, the 2G would consume about 6 times higher current consumption compared to LTE-M and NB-IoT. Another aspect that we discussed and explained in the energy efficiency white paper is the properly selected protocol. There are multiple protocols exist, like HTTP, TCP, UDP, CoAP, LTE-M. Some of them are legacy, some are them new, and the device developers must take this into account. There are some protocols that are much less efficient, and there are clear guidelines what are the recommendation for which protocol is better to use into your product. There are much more recommendation, and all of this being covered in the white paper, so you can just scan these QR codes. You'll get the direct link to download the white paper. So I'm not just talking about the energy efficiency white paper. We had a few more guideline documentation done, and please take these screenshots or just directly download these papers.
Excellent, thank you, Igor. And as a side note, incidentally, the LP-WAN, LPWA terminology that's been used was actually coined by my business partner, Jim Morris, back in about 2012, with the critical thing being the low power. That's the most important thing about this. It's not about low data rates or cheap or whatever. The critical thing is the energy reduction and therefore opening up all of these additional business models. Luke, can I come on to you? Deployment guidelines. There's been some mention about deployment guidelines. Can you talk through that a little bit?
Yeah.
Some of the experiences we have gained from having deployed these networks and run them, and therefore can kind of feed back into everybody else and how they think about deploying them.
Absolutely. So we published a new set of deployment guidelines in September last year. It's the first major refresh of the guidelines that we've published since we started to deploy narrowband IoT and LTE-M networks. And we focused on 3 main areas. We unified, we updated, and we restructured. So we unified in the sense that because the two technologies, narrowband IoT, LTE-M, they're now seen to be extremely complementary. In fact, you often find them deployed side by side in the same network. And we found it made no sense then to maintain completely separate deployment guidelines for the two technologies. So we took a decision to unify that, make the guidelines more digestible, more readable, easier to basically use and operate. We updated them, and as Matt says, we're now building on 5 years of real deployment experience. So we're in a position to understand what works, which features have been adopted, which features perhaps for good reason haven't been adopted. And it's also a very good exercise to reflect on which new and emerging features might be getting adopted by the marketplace that have only just been standardized. We also extended the target audience of the guidelines. Initially, of course, it was very much aimed at network operators. If you think back to the early days of LPWA, this was a new set of capabilities that we were deploying for the first time. Different planning guidelines, different ways of selling it, and the deployment guides were very much aimed at network operators rather than other parts of the ecosystem. Spin forward a few years, we're in the fortunate position of having to deploy these networks now. And so we wanted to extend the deployment guides to be something that's a very useful resource also for solution developers, so they can use it as a reference to understand what features are likely to be deployed by operators worldwide and how then to build solutions that map onto those. And the final part I mentioned is restructured, so I hinted at this a moment ago, but we have quite ruthlessly gone through the whole myriad of features that has been specified by 3GPP and sorted out which ones do we now consider, with the power of deployment, to be absolutely essential. Which ones are the minimum baseline requirement set of features that operators need to be enabling in order to get the most out of these technologies. And as Matt said, this goes into the heart of LPWA, such as making sure that the device has maximum power, making sure that it's reachable, because the other part of this is wide area, and of course, making sure that the cost is maintained. So we restructured it into these minimum features. We then tagged out ones that are new or emerging, yet to gain market traction. Jury's still out. And then we also, fairly ruthlessly, set aside some of the features that, despite being standardized and quite often offered to the market for adoption, haven't been adopted, and a little bit of context as to why. So with that in mind, we felt the document was much clearer in terms of really clarifying what we need to be doing together as operators. So I just wanted to mention a few of these, and I've written them down to make sure that I don't lose them. And I'm not going to go.
I was going to ask, what are the features? So you're way ahead of me.
Yeah. So for example, on the minimum baseline, so we've got PS under power save mode. Sounds obvious. You need to switch that on. You need to switch on extended discontinuous reception. You need to switch on the rate control mechanism, the release assistance function, and then we've got a subset of features for LTE-M and narrowband, such as switching on half duplex for LTE-M, switching on extended coverage, switching on Cat-M1, and then for narrowband, the same thing, extended coverage, MB1, MB2. So if you look at the deployment guide, it now gives some very, very concise, specific guidance on which features you really ought to be switching on if you want to get the most out of these technologies. And also which ones are, bubbling up, if you like, for consideration, might add some new capabilities that we haven't yet explored. The main purpose of the guideline then, and the reason why I'm very glad that we've got the chance to showcase it a little bit here, is because we want to promote it. We want operators to be adopting the guideline recommendations, and by reflection, it then provides an extremely useful resource for solution developers looking for some hints as to what they might find when they start to develop these products. And finally, I would say we're not going to take another 5 years before we update this. Very living document. We've got a great community within the IoT space, lots of friendly collaboration. We want to make sure that we get feedback from operators, feedback from solution developers on the guidelines, and we commit to regularly updating those to reflect that and keep it living, keep it relevant.
Excellent. Thanks, Lou. Sam, you've been sitting there very patiently on the end as the literal and maybe metaphorical outlier in the group. Pod Group, not a member of the 5G IoT strategy group, but very interested in your perspectives on this, particularly in the context of multi-country deployment, because obviously if these technologies are going to replace, well, 2G really is the critical thing. You need that kind of infrastructure for roaming or capability. So how do you see the adoption and some of the challenges and the opportunities associated with maybe particularly LTE-M, but NB-IoT as well?
Yeah, and I think for me, I mean, when we look at kind of global IoT deployments in particular, that's where the work that this group is doing is really invaluable. Because what we've seen to date, particularly with LTE, Cat-M, and NB-IoT in its current form, is inconsistency in how they're deployed by networks around the world. And if you're looking to deploy these things globally, if one network in one country is doing it one way and another country is doing it another way, maybe back to the power saving stuff that you talked about, then your application may essentially fail at the first hurdle. So that consistency in deployment is really, really important. But I think some of the challenges that will still exist is getting it globally deployed. And I think we've seen with LTE-M and NB-IoT, different countries taking different approaches. Some countries having no approach. I think 2G and 3G obviously are being sunsetted, but in some emerging markets they may last a little longer than we expect. And as these are standardized now in 5G, will some markets wait until they have their 5G standalone cores enabled? And I think it's also important to point out to those building applications from a global roaming perspective is that in the NSA environment, most of the benefits aren't realized in 5G. So it does really rely on the standalone 5G deployments. And I think as of, I think it was September, October last year, there was maybe only 29 networks, I think, with their standalone cores fully deployed globally.
Very few, yeah.
Yeah, and so when we look at 180 plus countries around the world, how far have we got to go before we can really, see all of the benefits from a cost-saving perspective, a power-saving perspective, because otherwise we're looking at modules that have to support multiple technologies on the same modem in order to get global coverage, and that's driving up the cost, not driving down the cost. So we're in a kind of a really interesting period right now, and that's why I say it's really great that there's much better guidelines in terms of how this is deployed, because as it rolls out, we can rely on it. And as a global MVNO working with lots of different customers, I think that's been one of the biggest challenges to date with the technology. But it is a fantastic technology for kind of mass IoT deployments. There's tons of benefits where it is deployed really well. I mean, if we look at North America, I think they've kind of led the way in terms of the Cat-M deployments, at least from my perspective. And we've seen the adoption skyrocket because we can see that the cost of the device is coming down and the availability of the network is increasing. So I think there's still a lot of challenges and roadblocks ahead, so it's great to hear that this is a really living document, and I think carriers and then for consumers of that information like MVNOs and application builders and device builders to really be able to reference that as well and start to really think about building compatibility and natively at the device, not just from a network level, but also from a SIM card technology and iSIM and eSIM perspective as well, which was talked about earlier, and making sure that they all fit together, because it's easy to look up if you're a device maker or if you're a software provider or middleware provider without looking back down and really addressing the full end-to-end stack and all of its complexity. So, yeah, I think it's a really interesting space.
And how do you see the availability or the transparency for the availability of these networks? Because obviously you work with carriers around the world. You will have direct arrangements with some of them. You'll work kind of indirectly with others. How aware are you and how easy is it for you to know, okay, where have I got EDRX and PSM available, and how comfortable am I to go to my customers and say, yeah, you can use LTE-M. Yeah, it's going to work within the parameters that are set out, that we would aspire to, at least.
Yeah, today I think it's a bit of a challenge to know exactly what is deployed on every network. Obviously, I think as this has matured, the roaming partners are really starting to get a grip, and they're doing the right testing, and they're being able to provide that information back to you. But, sometimes you see, okay, this country has LTE-M available. Maybe it's only a single country, and maybe it's only been deployed in half of the country. So, it's not always consistent. So from that perspective, it's a challenge, and that's where, I think from my personal perspective, the MVNO space is a really interesting one for helping enable this globally, because every carrier has different strengths. Every carrier has different weaknesses in terms of coverage and availability. And so being able to flexibly combine those, and I think flexibility was something Simon talked about as well, from the connectivity perspective, and deploy kind of based on what you're seeing on a network, the correct provisioned or production profile is going to be really helpful moving forward. So, I think there's a lot more we could probably do in terms of, publishing. I think GSMA does have a map on the website, which is a really great tool, actually. But how can that map go further to really give more granular information about what's deployed on each network? How can those networks be reporting it? So there is kind of a global kind of information station, if that makes sense.
Yeah, very good. In the less than 1 minute left, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, because I think to complete what was said is that the third document that we didn't talk about is on the roaming. Yep. And in fact, there is you see there is already an amount of information concerning the parameters of this network, because when you have a feature activated, you also have some timers, you have some parameters that are needed to be known so that you can build your application properly. And so in this third document, you'll be able to see what are available in the networks, the operators' networks. So it's a voluntary publication, so we try to get together as much as possible. But for now, we still got worked on our plate, but it's already available for mostly probably a third of the operated networks in the world already now are represented. So it will increase over time.
Fantastic. I have red zeros flashing at me, so it's time that we vacated the stage. Gentlemen, thank you very much.